She stepped out of the black car alone, shoulders square, gaze forward, a flash of silver stitched onto her sash, and in that moment, the future of the monarchy shifted forever. That was the scene, frozen in time, that left royal watchers, constitutional scholars, and even seasoned palace aides scrambling to catch their breath. Princess Charlotte of Wales, just 10 years old, had appeared at what was meant to be a private royal engagement, wearing a title not seen in nearly a century. And the weight of it, monumental, shocking, unprecedented. This wasn't just a ceremonial nod or childhood pageantry. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This was a declaration. The firm, bruised and battered from years of public backlash, family fracture, and relentless media wars, had just made its boldest move yet, and they'd made it through a child. But why Charlotte? Why now? And why this title? An ancient relic of monarchical history, wrapped in whispers of betrayal, scandal, and ambition? What you're about to uncover is more than just a sweet story about a young royal growing up. This is a tale of power, strategy, legacy, and something darker, something no one saw coming. Because while the world has kept its eyes glued to Prince William's ascent, Harry and Meghan's drama, or King Charles's health, another narrative has been brewing quietly in the background. A narrative that is now stepping into full view, with a velvet sash, royal decree, and a girl at the center of it all. And here's where it gets personal. Because this isn't just about royal PR. This is about a decision that's already triggering old resentments within the palace walls. There are those who believe Charlotte's elevation signals a return to monarchical roots, and those who see it as a betrayal of everything modern royals claim to stand for. One insider even whispered, "They didn't give her that title. They armed her with it." What does that mean? To understand the magnitude of this moment, we have to step back. We have to rewind to the days just before this bombshell announcement. A time when whispers in the halls of Buckingham and Kensington told a very different story. A time when the very idea of elevating a child into working royal status would have been laughed off as madness. And yet, here we are. The timing was no accident. Let's get this clear. Nothing the palace does is without reason or calculation. The Windsors have always played the long game. So ask yourself, why now? Why reveal Charlotte in this light, with this title, at this moment? Here's one theory, perhaps the most compelling one. The monarchy is bleeding credibility. The late Queen's stabilizing presence is gone. Prince Andrew remains in quiet disgrace. Meghan and Harry's media blitz has exposed cracks once papered over by tradition and protocol. King Charles, though dutiful, has not captured the world's imagination. Even William and Catherine, polished and poised, have started to face whispers about fading relevance. Enter Charlotte. Not the heir, not the spare, but the symbol. A symbol of innocence, grace, and continuity. A symbol untarnished by scandal, untouched by betrayal, and unburdened, for now, by royal cynicism. What better figure to present to a skeptical public? But this was more than symbolic. It was strategic. By bestowing a rare royal title upon her, one thought to be extinct, they've rewritten the rules. Quietly, deliberately, and for reasons that go far deeper than ceremonial duty. A title with teeth. We'll explore the origins of this title in detail later, but here's what you need to know. It hasn't been seen in public since 1936, the same year King Edward VIII abdicated the throne. A title so tied to royal crisis that even the Queen Mother reportedly warned it should never be spoken aloud again. And yet, Charlotte now bears it. Are you beginning to see the cracks in the story the palace wants us to believe? A young girl granted a legacy soaked in royal drama, handed a status that positions her not just as a spare to the heir, but something potentially more influential. A working royal, yes, but also something closer to a future figurehead, should things go awry in the line of succession. And perhaps that's what this is really about. Contingency. Control. Catherine's beloved daughter isn't just stepping into public life. She's stepping into a plan. Because as we'll reveal in the coming chapters, there are those within the palace who no longer view succession as guaranteed. Charles's reign is transitional. William's will be tested. George is still young. The future is uncertain. And so Charlotte, it seems, is the quiet answer to a very loud question. The emotional core. But let's not forget. At the center of all this political maneuvering is a little girl. A child with school books in her satchel, ballet shoes in her closet, and now a centuries-old burden wrapped around her shoulders like a royal cloak. How does a 10-year-old process the knowledge that they're being positioned as the monarchy's secret weapon? Insiders say she was told during a quiet afternoon walk by her mother that she didn't cry, that she nodded, that she understood more than anyone expected. One former aide whispered, "It was like she'd already known, like someone had already told her." Told her what exactly? We'll get there. And trust me, you'll want to hear that story. But before we do, consider this. Charlotte's rise is already having ripple effects. Not just within the public eye, but within the royal family itself. Siblings, cousins, aunts and uncles, all are watching. Some with pride, others with unease. There's jealousy. There's fear. There are secrets. The kind that only come to light when someone new is brought into the inner circle. And that's what this video will uncover. A warning from the past. Here's a chilling detail to keep in mind. The last time a royal girl was granted this specific role, it ended in exile. A lifetime of isolation. A broken heart. A line removed from royal memory like it never existed. Is Charlotte walking the same path? Or is she being positioned to rewrite the rules of royal femininity, duty, and power? That's the tightrope she now walks. On one side, a life of ceremonial smiles and tightly controlled appearances. On the other, real influence, real danger, real legacy. We'll follow that thread. We'll look at everything. The hidden meetings, the legal paperwork, the alleged letters left behind by Queen Elizabeth II herself. We'll explore the fallout, because make no mistake, there has been fallout. From Camilla, from Meghan, from sources you haven't heard from until now. And yes, we'll take you inside that sealed velvet box. The one that was presented to Charlotte on that windy spring morning. The one no one expected her to receive. The one that, according to royal legend, contains a medallion and a vow. So where do we go from here? What happens when a child becomes a cornerstone of a centuries-old institution? What happens when innocence collides with ambition? And what happens when secrets meant to stay buried resurface in the hands of someone too young to understand the weight of them? Or perhaps, just young enough to carry them without fear? Charlotte may be a child, but this moment is no child's game. And whether the palace admits it or not, this marks a turning point. A new royal chapter is beginning. One not written by kings, or heirs, or disgraced dukes, but by a girl. A girl who curtsied, smiled, and changed the fate of a monarchy with a single step onto a stone courtyard. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. How do you hide a royal ceremony in a world saturated with smartphones, drones, and global live streams? How do you crown a child with a legacy, quietly, secretly, yet still keep the illusion of transparency? The answer? You don't. Or at least you try. Because despite every precaution, every coded schedule, and embargoed media alert, someone saw it. Someone filmed it. And what they captured shattered years of royal tradition in under 90 seconds. Let's go back. The morning was unseasonably cold. Not winter, but not quite spring. The type of London air that feels like it's holding its breath. Just after 8 a.m., an unmarked black Land Rover pulled up to the side entrance of Windsor Castle. An entry point usually reserved for late-night diplomatic arrivals or discreet medical visits. No press, no crowd, no ceremony scheduled, at least publicly. And yet, 3 sharply dressed aides stepped out in sequence, followed by a woman in a dove-gray coat. And then her, Charlotte, not in her school uniform, not in a casual coat-in ballet flats ensemble, but in something else entirely. A custom-tailored navy dress, military in cut, subtle in design, but unmistakably royal. The gold trim, the sash, and most notably, the crest stitched over her heart. A design not seen in decades. A design that had once belonged to a royal ancestor, whose name the palace no longer speaks aloud. What was happening? A local dog walker, passing with his husky, froze. A discreet flick of the phone. One tap. Recording. He didn't know what he was seeing, but he knew it wasn't nothing. Because Charlotte wasn't being walked into Windsor like a child. She wasn't flanked by her parents. She wasn't holding anyone's hand. She was walking with purpose. A quiet, practiced poise. Almost ceremonial. And then came the detail that sent the internet into a frenzy once that video leaked. The box. A velvet-lined box, deep crimson, carried by a palace aide with gloved hands. It was not large, not ornate, but the air around it? Heavy, as though it contained not just an object, but a legacy. What's inside that box? We'll come back to that, because before it was opened, before the world learned what title had been resurrected, Charlotte did something else. Something that set off a storm behind closed doors. She paused, turned, and faced the small courtyard behind her. Empty, save for 3 stone benches and a royal flag fluttering gently in the wind. She raised her chin and curtsied. To no one, or so it seemed. Now ask yourself, who had been sitting on that bench earlier that morning? Who had left moments before she arrived? Who had been part of the pre-ceremony discussion that the palace insists never happened? Because according to an anonymous footman, a man who had worked under both Queen Elizabeth and now King Charles, the figure who gave Charlotte her final briefing before she stepped out of that car wasn't her mother. It was Camilla. And what exactly was said? Well, that's where it gets dark. The source alleges that Camilla's final words to Charlotte were not congratulatory, not nurturing, not regal. They were, allegedly, do not make the same mistake she did. You get one chance. Who is she? Meghan? Diana? Or someone buried even deeper in the royal archives? Let's dig further. Once Charlotte entered the inner courtyard, the rest of the ceremony was shielded from public view. The palace had it under wraps. Security was high, and not just the usual armed detail. Sources report that at least one MI5 vehicle was spotted idling near the service tunnel. A direct sign that whatever was happening had implications beyond PR. This was about state, power, protection. You might be wondering, how could this happen without public notice? Here's the thing. The royal family knows how to operate in shadow when it needs to. In fact, most of the monarchy's major transitions, the ones that really matter, don't happen on balconies or with red velvet. They happen in the cracks, in mourning ceremonies without press, in whispered oaths behind iron gates, in the rituals that feel like throwbacks to another age because they are. We've seen versions of this before. The secret wedding vows, the private consecrations, the off-book handovers of estates. But never, never has a child been at the center of one. And certainly not like this. Because just before Charlotte reappeared, 26 minutes later, flanked by 3 different aides from those who had brought her in, something strange occurred. One of the aides exited ahead of her, carrying the box. But now, it was closed and sealed with red wax. On the side, a discreet embossed sigil, a phoenix, wrapped in ivy. It's a design not registered with the College of Arms. In fact, no modern records contain it. But historians of royal antiquities have seen it before. Once, on a brooch worn by Princess Victoria Melita, the exiled granddaughter of Queen Victoria. A woman who defied the crown, lost her title, and was exiled for marrying without permission. A woman whose personal motto was, chillingly, duty reborn. Are you beginning to see the pattern? But what about the reaction from those who weren't there? Because that's where this story explodes. A royal aide from Clarence House reportedly received a photo of Charlotte in the sash and crest just 2 hours after the ceremony ended. Their response? They forwarded it to 3 internal palace emails. And then resigned. No public statement. No scandal. Just a quiet exit. But it's who they had worked for that matters. Camilla. Was this aide's resignation a protest? A warning? A mistake that exposed more than it protected? And then there's the footage. The dog walker's video hit social media less than 36 hours after the ceremony. Blurry, shaky, under 30 seconds. But enough to show Charlotte, poised in her uniform, making that curtsy. It was taken down quickly. Struck by copyright and privacy claims from the palace. But not before it was viewed over 4 million times. And not before it was mirrored, duplicated, and dissected by body language experts, YouTubers, and former royal staff. One former press officer described it as the most controlled show of unscripted power I've ever seen in a child that age. Another insider claimed, the moment that footage went viral, 3 meetings were scheduled across 3 royal households. None of them included Catherine. Now that is a revelation. Because if the Princess of Wales wasn't part of the planning, wasn't in the room, and wasn't consulted, what does that say about who truly orchestrated this? And why keep it from her? Let's go one step deeper. The room in which the alleged title ceremony took place is not just any room. It's the Phoenix Room, a private chamber at Windsor historically reserved for rights of renewal. It was last used in 1971 when Queen Elizabeth reportedly gave Princess an access to sealed personal files about the abdication crisis. It is not listed on public palace tours. It does not appear on any official floor plan, and it's watched by guards who rotate every 36 minutes, instead of the standard 45. What does that tell you? It tells you the firm knew exactly what they were doing, that this was more than just pageantry, that it was a handover, a naming, a beginning. But for whom? Because when Charlotte emerged, her expression wasn't joyful. It wasn't frightened either. It was focused, as if she already understood what it meant to wear something that once damned another royal girl to exile. That's not nothing. So let's return to the box. Sources say the object inside, the one placed into Charlotte's hands for a mere 8 seconds before being resealed, was a medallion. Oval, bronze, bearing the phoenix and ivy crest, and inscribed on the back? A single phrase. Stand where she fell. That's the phrase. What does it mean? Who is she? Why now? Those are the questions we'll dig into in the next chapter. Because the forgotten title Charlotte received has a long, bitter history, and its last bearer died disgraced, alone, and erased from royal memory. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What kind of royal title disappears from the public eye for nearly a century? And why would the palace go to such lengths to bury it, only to resurrect it now? And for a child? Because that's exactly what's happened. When Princess Charlotte stepped out bearing the crest stitched onto her sash, obscure, antique, and unlisted on any modern register, royal historians went scrambling. And what they uncovered wasn't just rare. It was radioactive. The title in question? Lady of the Shield. Not princess, not duchess, not even something ceremonial like royal patron of X. No, this was older, stranger, more myth than official rank. But it was real. And its last bearer wasn't someone you'll find in modern royal biographies or Jubilee photo galleries. No, she was someone the palace deliberately deleted from public memory. A girl born too high to marry low, too bold to play silent, and too early to survive the rules. Her name was Princess Eleanor of Kent. Never heard of her? That's by design. She lived in the shadow of Edward VIII's abdication. A cousin twice removed, Eleanor was bestowed the title Lady of the Shield during a royal crisis. At just 11 years old, she was paraded as a symbol of monarchical virtue after Edward's disgrace. She was polished, paraded, praised, and then punished. Because Eleanor didn't stay silent. She questioned the expectations placed upon her. She wrote letters. She loved a man far beneath her station. And when she refused to end the relationship, the crown acted. Her title was revoked. Her name was stripped from royal rolls. She was banished from England and died in obscurity in a remote estate in Malta, where her gravestone read, "Here rests a shield never broken." The official record? Redacted. Until now. Because the sash Charlotte wore bore the same sigil Eleanor had worn before her exile. The medallion, reportedly given to Charlotte during the Windsor ceremony, was designed in Eleanor's memory. It had once belonged to her. So why bring it back? Why risk the media storm, the historical contradictions, the backlash of tying a modern child to a disgraced royal ghost? Because the crown needs a symbol. And sometimes, the most powerful symbols are the ones we're told to forget. Let's step back. The Lady of the Shield isn't technically a peerage title. It doesn't come with land, voting rights in the House of Lords, or a hereditary line. It's closer to a monastic knighthood, an honor bestowed only once per generation, and only to a female member of the royal bloodline. The title is said to bind the bearer to the defense of the crown's legacy, not its lineage. And that's key, not its lineage. Because unlike traditional titles that follow birthright and hierarchy, the Lady of the Shield is chosen, not inherited. And that raises a provocative question. Was Charlotte chosen over her brother? Prince George, the direct heir, has not received a parallel title, nor has Prince Louis. Yet Charlotte now holds an honor steeped in duty, in defiance, and in sacrificial loyalty. Was this title meant to create a quiet counterbalance? Some insiders believe so. One royal aide, speaking anonymously, shared that the decision was months in the making. That Queen Elizabeth II had intended for the title to be reactivated, but only under extraordinary social circumstances. that the title was a contingency, a moral failsafe for the monarchy, in case the line of succession became politically unstable or unpopular. Sound familiar? The public's trust in the royal family has taken blow after blow. From Harry and Meghan's revelations to Andrew's scandals, the firm has been on the back foot for years. Even William and Catherine, once universally beloved, have begun facing the sharp edge of modern critique: elitism, detachment, tradition over transparency. Enter Charlotte, a child, unspoiled, unscathed, positioned not as a future queen, but as a living reminder of the monarchy's values, as they wish them to be remembered. And that is where the danger lies. Because using a child to stabilize a centuries-old institution isn't just controversial, it's risky. The weight of public symbolism is crushing. Just ask Diana, or Meghan, or even Queen Elizabeth herself, who was crowned too young and spent the rest of her life bearing the contradictions of duty and self. And yet, Charlotte is now the youngest working royal of the family, the youngest title holder of any position bearing institutional obligation. The palace is quick to deny that she's working, of course, but her schedule is telling a different story. Sources say she will begin shadowing her mother in select patronage appearances starting this fall. Private meetings, select photo ops, behind-the-scenes briefings. It's being spun as educational exposure. But make no mistake, this is the beginning of a royal rollout. And if history has taught us anything, it's this: when the crown moves a pawn early, they're setting up for a checkmate later. Let's talk about that crest, the phoenix and ivy. It's not random. The phoenix, of course, symbolizes rebirth. But within the royal context, it's also a nod to resurgence after disgrace. Remember, Queen Elizabeth II used a phoenix symbol once on her private Christmas cards during the early years of her reign, after a series of constitutional upsets. The ivy? That's older. In royal lore, ivy represents entanglement, cling, the inability to escape fate. So combine the two, rebirth through entanglement. Is that what Charlotte's future holds? A ceremonial rise. Beautiful, admirable, but inescapably bound to something far heavier? And who is orchestrating it? Because as you'll see in the next chapter, there's reason to believe this title wasn't William's idea, or even Charles's, but rather the fulfillment of a plan set in motion by Queen Elizabeth herself, long before her death. A plan that required secrecy, timing, and, most chillingly, sacrifice. One aide claimed there was a sealed envelope labeled, "For the shield bearer." And it was only to be opened when the house is fractured and the eyes of the people grow cold. Sound melodramatic? Then ask yourself this: why? Out of all the royal traditions, revivals, and potential legacies, this one? Why not a new duchy? A new patronage? A safer, sanitized title? Why dig up Eleanor of Kent, the one royal girl whose name was scrubbed from memory? Maybe it's because Eleanor's exile was never meant to erase her. Maybe it was meant to delay her return. And now, through Charlotte, she has returned. The Lady of the Shield rides again. Only this time, she's younger, sharper, and this time, everyone's watching. But what they don't know is what's coming next. Because in the Queen's secret letters, there was more than just a name. There was a warning, and that warning? It wasn't addressed to Charlotte. It was addressed to Camilla. And what it said could unravel everything this ceremony was meant to fix. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. What if I told you Queen Elizabeth II didn't just plan for her death, but for what came after it, with the precision of a chess master and the emotion of a mother who had seen her family spiral more than once? What if some of the monarchy's most controversial decisions in the years following her passing weren't spontaneous at all, but pieces of a long-hidden puzzle, now beginning to surface through the hands of a 10-year-old girl? Because deep inside Windsor Castle, sealed in a reinforced box kept behind a false panel in the royal archives, was a bundle of letters. Handwritten, personal, and most of all, strategic. These weren't public statements or official notes. These were private directives, marked with the Queen's personal cipher and written in her own unmistakable script. And among them, one that simply read, "For the shield bearer. Open only in the presence of Her Majesty's appointed reader." Until recently, no one even knew what shield bearer referred to. Most believed it was ceremonial gibberish. Obsolete. Outdated. Then came the Windsor ceremony. Then came Charlotte. Then came the crest. And suddenly, the meaning became chillingly clear. Let's rewind. Weeks after Queen Elizabeth's funeral, as the royal households were still reeling from logistics and public appearances, a team from the Royal Archives was tasked with sorting through the Queen's sealed personal correspondences. Hundreds of letters, some addressed to family members, others to future monarchs, and a select few, almost cryptic in nature, with no name. Only titles: The One Who Knows, The Second Swan, The Shield Bearer. Palisades were baffled. But Elizabeth's longtime private secretary, Sir Clive Winterbourne, a man known for his discretion and unnerving memory, knew exactly what they meant. Because years earlier, after the Meghan and Harry media storm broke, and after Andrew's disastrous BBC interview, the Queen had requested a discreet meeting with Sir Clive in her Balmoral study. There, she allegedly told him, "There will come a time when the house is divided not by blood, but by belief. When duty feels more like theater, and truth more like theater's rival. When that happens, a child will remind them what it means to stand still." It sounded poetic at the time. Now, it sounds prophetic. And within those sealed letters, her intention became undeniable. One letter, addressed to the shield bearer, contained a detailed description of a medallion. Yes, the very one given to Charlotte in the secret ceremony. The Queen instructed that it be given only when the royal household has fractured along generational lines and the second-born girl of the House of Wales comes of age in the shadow of public suspicion. Let that sink in. She didn't name Charlotte directly, but she described her, eerily, long before the public ever viewed her as more than the spare daughter. Second-born girl of the House of Wales. Comes of age in the shadow of public suspicion. This was written over 6 years ago. So how did the Queen know? Some believe she saw the storm coming. That Harry and Meghan's growing discontent wasn't just personal, it was generational. That their accusations of racism, hierarchy, and neglect would widen the gap between old and new. That the house would lose not just control of its image, but control of its meaning. And what do monarchies fear more than revolution? Irrelevance. So the Queen set out to build a failsafe. A symbol not of tradition, but of timelessness. Not of power, but of permanence. A child. A girl. Charlotte. But here's the twist, and you might want to sit with this one. The letter wasn't addressed to Charlotte. It was addressed to someone else entirely. Camilla. Why? Because in the Queen's view, only someone who had been both outsider and insider could be trusted to pass the message. Only someone who had once been hated, then embraced. Reviled, then crowned. Someone who understood what it meant to carry a legacy that wasn't hers. The Queen's note to Camilla included a directive. When the second-born daughter is of walking age, but not yet of questioning age, begin the stories. Begin the lessons. Begin the reminders of who came before and why they were forgotten. And when she no longer asks why, but asks when, you will know it is time. Insiders claim Camilla wept upon reading the letter, but not out of sentiment, out of fear, because it meant she was being tasked with overseeing a legacy that, if mishandled, could backfire spectacularly. And perhaps that's why the title remained hidden for so long. Why Charlotte continued living the appearance of a normal childhood, even as certain people, tutors, mentors, aides, began appearing in her life with curious regularity. One such mentor, Lady Rosamund Blair Hastings, an academic specializing in royal mythology and former consultant to the Crown's educational curriculum. She had been retired for 5 years, until summoned back, quietly, to work with a young female royal on matters of historical symbolism. She was seen entering Kensington Palace twice in the last year, each time leaving with a small sealed folder. And inside those folders, reportedly, were pages from the Queen's letters. So what exactly did Charlotte learn from them? We don't know the full content, but fragments have been whispered. Phrases like, "The crown is not won. It is waited for. History bends for those who carry it without demand. To be a shield bearer is to know when not to speak, and when silence becomes betrayal." These aren't lessons for a child. These are the words of a monarch preparing her replacement. Not by bloodline, but by belief. And perhaps that's the point. Perhaps Charlotte isn't being raised to lead. She's being raised to outlast, to endure what her predecessors couldn't, to bear the burden without needing the throne. A permanent symbol that the monarchy can still produce grace, dignity, and duty, without spectacle or scandal. But here's where it gets darker. Another letter, dated 5 years before the Queen's passing, marked confidential for the second swan, a nickname the Queen privately used for Catherine. This letter contained a warning. There will be those who seek to shape her, not support her. They will flatter and pressure. They will offer exposure in place of guidance. If she ever becomes spectacle before she becomes service, the crown will split again. What does that mean? Some royal watchers interpret this as a jab at Meghan. Others, more ominously, as a foreshadowing of internal conflict, perhaps even among Charlotte's own family members. Because with power comes envy, and with symbolism comes scrutiny. Already, whispers are surfacing that Prince George feels uncomfortable with Charlotte's new role, that Louis asked why he wasn't given a crest, that William, though outwardly proud, has privately questioned the intensity of Charlotte's sudden responsibilities. And Catherine? Well, according to one aide, she was visibly shaken when told of the ceremony only hours before it happened. This wasn't her plan. It was the Queen's. And now, that plan is moving forward, with or without her. So what do we make of these letters? Are they the final act of a monarch desperate to preserve an outdated institution? Or are they something bolder? A new royal model, one led not by hierarchy, but by history? And if so, is Charlotte ready? More importantly, is the world? Because as we'll see in the next chapter, the palace's strategy didn't stop at titles or ceremonies. There's an entire blueprint for how Charlotte is to be presented to the public, and the palace is playing a long game. They're not just shaping a child. They're rewriting the rules of what it means to be royal. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. What if the ceremony wasn't the beginning, but the end of the beginning? What if Charlotte's rare royal title was just the visible part of a far more intricate machine? Because make no mistake, this isn't a spontaneous move. This isn't a one-off tradition revived on a whim. This is a long-gestating, meticulously orchestrated royal strategy. And at the heart of it lies a dangerous question. Is Princess Charlotte being groomed or weaponized? Let's pull back the curtain. For years, the British monarchy has been locked in a quiet identity crisis. Queen Elizabeth II was the last monarch who could command reverence through sheer presence. Her reign was a slow, silent performance of duty, dressed in pastels and pearls, carried out behind unreadable eyes. But after her death, that authority vanished like smoke. King Charles, for all his earnestness, hasn't filled the void. His reign began under the shadow of strained popularity and questions about whether the monarchy even should continue. Then came Harry and Meghan's revelations. Then the Andrew disgrace. Then the public fatigue. The mystique was gone. The firm was fractured. And what does an institution do when it's in survival mode? It returns to storytelling. Enter Charlotte, not as a placeholder, not as a duchess-in-waiting, but as a carefully sculpted narrative pivot. A living, breathing symbol of innocence, continuity, and, let's be brutally honest, redirection. Insiders reveal that a secret internal document, codenamed Project Shield, was first drafted during the height of the Meghan media fallout. Circulated quietly between Clarence House and Kensington Palace, the memo laid out a potential future where public trust in senior royals would continue to decline, and where a younger, untainted figure would be needed to restore emotional connection. The term used in the memo? Soft anchor. That anchor? Charlotte. And here's the part that's truly shocking. The document suggested a shift in the way the monarchy presents working royals to the public, not as duty-bound adults, but as evolving personas whose growth the public is invited to witness. Think about that. The monarchy isn't just preserving tradition. It's experimenting with content strategy. Charlotte, according to multiple sources, is the first royal child whose public role is being mapped by a hybrid team, part protocol, part PR, and part psychological development specialists. A trifecta of image-making not seen since Diana. Except this time, there's no room for spontaneity. A media executive familiar with palace coordination lets slip a chilling line. They want to grow Charlotte the way Apple grows its product line. Consistent, familiar, but every few years, something new. Something polished. Something to talk about. And what does that mean in practice? Let's look at the pattern. In the past year alone, Charlotte's public image has subtly shifted. Her outfits now echo classic royal silhouettes, mirroring princess and childhood wardrobe. Her photo releases have become more stylized, soft lighting, purposeful poses, minimal distractions. Not candid, controlled. She has been increasingly placed in solo shot settings during royal events. Despite being surrounded by family, and most tellingly, she's begun appearing in educational and philanthropic contexts that are historically reserved for royals well into their teens. Remember her visit to the Children's Hospital with Catherine last year? It wasn't just a sweet photo op. That event was part of a trial rollout of a new initiative, the Young Guardians Program, a palace-backed project to slowly acclimate younger royals to roles of service without the formal trappings of work. Charlotte's participation was framed as a child's curiosity, but it was actually step one. Step two, the Windsor ceremony, the title, the medallion, the shielding, and step three, well, that's what's currently being planned behind closed doors at Sandringham. According to a leaked event schedule draft, there's an unannounced private summit happening in 2 months. A 3-day retreat involving senior royal strategists, image consultants, and surprisingly, educational tech developers. Why tech developers? Because the palace is reportedly in talks with a digital experience firm to create a new multimedia platform centered around the Young Royals Initiative. And guess whose name is the first test balloon? Charlotte. Imagine an app, a curated video series, a documentary-style narrative about growing up royal that's soft, charming, digestible, but also powerfully manipulative. The palace doesn't want another Diana. They want a Charlotte who never needs to rebel. And how do you prevent rebellion? By making the cage look like a palace. By gilding the rules in velvet. By telling a child they're free to choose, but only giving them one path. She smiled. She clapped. She even posed for a photo. But once the cameras were gone, once the marble doors of the Windsor chamber closed, Queen Camilla turned, and according to 2 senior aides, her expression collapsed. The ceremony was over. The title had been given. The medallion sealed. And Princess Charlotte, the 10-year-old girl now holding a resurrected legacy, had walked off with a grace well beyond her years. Camilla stood there, motionless. And then she said, under her breath, "It's too soon. They don't know what they've done." Let's be clear, Camilla didn't object to Charlotte. She reportedly finds her intelligent, sharp, and unervingly composed. What rattled her wasn't who was given the role. It was what the role now represented. Because while the world focused on the crest, the sash, and the revival of a forgotten title, Camilla knew what it really meant. She had been the keeper of the Queen's letters. She had been the one entrusted with the posthumous directive. She had been tasked with watching, waiting, and passing the shield only when the time was right. And deep down, Camilla didn't believe the time had come. So why did she proceed? The answer is powerfully simple and devastatingly complex. She was overruled. According to palace insiders, the decision to move forward with Charlotte's elevation didn't originate with Camilla or even with William. It came directly from a royal inner circle known only by insiders as the Compass Group, comprised of 4 senior figures, one from Buckingham, one from Clarence House, one from Kensington, and one unofficial legacy advisor. The group has no formal title, no public record, and no precedent in royal history. It was allegedly formed during the peak of the Harry and Meghan fallout. Its purpose? To manage the monarchy's narrative axis across generations. Camilla, while initially briefed, was never a voting member. And so, when the Compass unanimously approved the early activation of the shield-bearer title, citing growing public discontent and falling youth engagement, Camilla's hands were tied. She followed the Queen's wishes, but not her timeline, and that decision left her shaken. Immediately after the Windsor ceremony, Camilla requested to be left alone in the private drawing room. Staff noted she removed her gloves slowly, methodically, as if trying to center herself. One aide offered tea. She declined. Another asked if she wanted to phone the king. She refused. Then, according to a third witness, she stood up, walked to the marble fireplace, and did something no one expected. She took one of the Queen's sealed letters from her handbag and burned it. Which letter? That's where the accounts diverge. Some believe it was a duplicate of the shield-bearer directive. Camilla's last personal copy, now unnecessary. Others say it was something else entirely. A different note. A warning from the Queen not to proceed if the title became a tool, not a torch. The aide who witnessed the moment claimed that as the envelope crackled in the flames, Camilla whispered, "She's not ready." And neither are they. But who was they? The public? The press? Or the family? Let's talk about that, because Camilla's reaction wasn't just rooted in protocol. It was personal. Ever since she was welcomed, reluctantly, into the royal fold, Camilla has walked a razor-thin line. Loved by some, tolerated by others. She knows what it means to be a symbol, to be weaponized, to be transformed into something the crown can use. She saw it happen to Diana. She saw it almost happen to Meghan. And now, she saw it beginning again, in the face of a 10-year-old girl who barely understood the weight now strapped across her shoulders. One former courtier, speaking under strict anonymity, shared that Camilla had once told a friend, "The only safe royals are the boring ones. The second you shine too brightly, they'll either push you into the spotlight or shove you out of it. Sometimes both. So what's Charlotte's fate? Spotlight. Or exile?" That's what Camilla fears. Not scandal, not rebellion, but burnout. The same force that chews up promising royals and spits them out at the altar of public expectation. And Camilla, with her long memory and hardened experience, saw the signs. She reportedly requested a private conversation with Catherine the evening after the ceremony. The two women spoke for nearly an hour behind closed doors. No aides, no press, no recordings. But what leaked out later from a Kensington insider paints a tense, complicated exchange. Camilla allegedly warned Catherine that Charlotte's exposure would now escalate faster than anticipated. She said the media would start treating Charlotte as the next Diana, but without the escape hatch. And most strikingly, she urged Catherine to push back when necessary, to be prepared to say no. Because once the tide of expectation builds, the firm doesn't reverse course. It doubles down. Catherine, according to the same insider, listened silently, nodded, but her face, they said, was stone, because perhaps Catherine had already seen it coming. Perhaps she, too, had received a letter. Perhaps she'd even tried to stop it. But the Compass Group had made its decision. And Camilla, like everyone else, was now left to manage the fallout. There's one more moment we need to talk about. 3 days after the Windsor ceremony, Camilla was scheduled to attend a private art gala at St. James's Palace. Her team reported her missing from the event. Not ill, not delayed, absent. Later, she was seen, unexpectedly, outside the Queen Mother's old apartments. Alone. In her hand, a copy of a children's storybook. The title? The Shield and the Songbird. An out-of-print tale once read to Queen Elizabeth as a child. A story about a young girl entrusted with a magic shield, who is told it will protect her, only to discover it also traps her, cutting her off from those she loves. Camilla stood there for nearly 20 minutes. Then she turned, walked back into the shadowed halls, and hasn't spoken publicly about Charlotte's title since. What does that tell you? It tells you that the machinery of monarchy may be strong, but its players are human. It tells you that even queens have doubts. It tells you that the story being spun for public consumption, the story of a happy, innocent child given a glorious honor, is far messier behind closed doors. Charlotte may be stepping into history, but she's also stepping into danger. Not physical danger, but emotional, psychological. The kind of danger that comes from being transformed into something other, something larger, something strategic, before you even understand who you are. Camilla saw that danger, felt it, and tried, however subtly, however privately, to raise the alarm. But the firm doesn't deal in feelings. It deals in legacy. And as you'll soon discover, even William had to make a choice between love and loyalty. Because the shield-bearer's title didn't just affect Charlotte. It forced William to gamble everything on a future no one could predict. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What would you do if you were a father, and the crown came calling for your daughter? What would you say if centuries of expectation landed on the shoulders of your 10-year-old child, under the guise of tradition, wrapped in honor, but laced with unspoken consequences? Now ask yourself, what if you couldn't say no? Because that was the crossroads Prince William found himself standing at. And when the moment came, when the choice was laid bare, not by proclamation, but by quiet implication, he didn't hesitate. He said yes. And in doing so, he didn't just place Charlotte on a path that could define her future. He reshaped his own legacy, and perhaps the entire House of Windsor. Let's rewind. It's easy to forget, amid the formalities and carefully staged photo ops, that Prince William isn't just the heir apparent. He's a man who's seen the best and worst of royal life. He walked behind his mother's coffin in front of the world. He endured the media frenzy that destroyed her. He watched his brother implode under similar pressures. And now, he's raising children under that same sky. So why would he agree to something as polarizing as bestowing an ancient and controversial title upon his young daughter? To understand that, we need to step inside a private study at Kensington Palace, months before the ceremony. Sources say this is where it began. A quiet meeting. No press. No formal agenda. Just William, 2 senior aides, and a dossier titled The Shield-Bearer Proposal. Inside, a lineage map, a list of possible responsibilities, a timeline, and a set of options. This wasn't a demand. It was a choice. Or at least, that's how it was presented. The proposal laid out what we now recognize as the Shield-Bearer Plan. It detailed how Charlotte's existing public perception, confident, poised, relatable, could be gently elevated over time. It explained the historical precedent of the Lady of the Shield title. And most of all, it framed the move as protective. The idea was this: better to shape her role now, while she's young, innocent, and well-supported, than risk a volatile, unscripted rise later, like Diana, like Harry, like Meghan. Preempt the chaos. Control the narrative. Protect the girl by preparing her. On paper, it made sense. But William knew better than most that paper and people don't mix neatly. He reportedly pushed back hard. He questioned the speed, the timing. He asked whether Charlotte had any real say in this. And that's when the aides made their case. They told him the monarchy was at a turning point. That public support among younger demographics was dropping. That George, as the future king, would be limited in the causes he could take on. But Charlotte could be dynamic. She could be the new face of female royal purpose. William, ever cautious, asked for time. He took the dossier home. And then, according to a friend of the family, he did something that shocked even Catherine. He brought it to Charlotte. Not all of it. Not the full burden. But enough. Enough to ask her the most royal question of them all. Do you want to help? That was the moment. Not a throne room. Not a command. Not a rehearsal. A quiet conversation between father and daughter. And her answer? If it helps Mummy and it helps you, then yes. But only if I don't have to stop being me. William didn't respond right away. But he nodded, closed the folder, and called the palace the next day. He said yes. But that yes wasn't unconditional. William reportedly negotiated the conditions of the shield-bearer role with intensity. He insisted on media blackout during initial briefings. He set strict boundaries on how many public appearances Charlotte would participate in annually. He even demanded veto power over any educational materials produced in connection with the title. But the most striking request? He asked that Charlotte's title never be officially announced in the court circular. Why? Because he didn't want it to become a headline. He wanted it to become hers, not a public label, but a private strength. Unfortunately, that strategy only worked for a few weeks. Once the Windsor ceremony occurred and the footage leaked, the floodgates opened. Royal watchers dissected every angle. Tabloids exploded. PR firms scrambled to issue statements that said everything and nothing. William, sources say, was furious. Not at Charlotte. Not even at the public. At the firm. Because in his eyes, he had upheld his end of the bargain, trusted the institution, followed its timeline, protected his daughter. But the machine moved faster than he could. Still, he stood by his choice. Why? Because William isn't just playing the role of future king. He's playing the long game of legacy repair. For decades, the House of Windsor has suffered from one fatal flaw. It breaks its brightest. Diana, Harry, even Margaret, years before. William is determined not to let history repeat with Charlotte. And perhaps, in his mind, the only way to break that cycle is to let her walk into duty with eyes wide open, on her terms, with his protection. But is that even possible? Royal life is rarely generous to those who enter it with idealism, and even less so to those who shine too brightly. Charlotte, by all accounts, is a star in the making. Articulate, emotionally intelligent, photogenic, sharp, and stars don't stay small. So William's gamble isn't just about shielding her from pressure. It's about betting that this time, with the right support, the crown won't consume the girl it lifts up, that she can grow into the role without losing herself inside it. A noble dream. But already, cracks are forming. In recent weeks, George has reportedly grown quieter during public events. He no longer laughs as freely when photographers call his name. At school, teachers have noted a shift, more reserved, more internal. Some say it's puberty. Others say it's the subtle sting of watching his sister become the family's emotional anchor, while he prepares for the more formal, colder future of kingship. And what of Catherine? Friends say she's supportive, proud, but quietly struggling with what's been set in motion. She knows what public favor looks like, and what it takes. She's watched it build people up. She's watched it destroy them. And she's watching it, now, inch toward her daughter. So where does this leave William? As a father caught between past trauma and future responsibility. As a man who lost his mother to the spotlight, watched his brother run from it, and now sees his daughter stepping into it, willingly. His gamble wasn't reckless. It was calculated, thoughtful, emotional, and yes, maybe even brave. But gambles have consequences. And if he's wrong, if the firm turns on Charlotte, or the public grows cold, or the media circles with the same hunger it showed Diana and Meghan, then the cost of this decision won't be measured in titles or headlines. It'll be written on the face of a girl who trusted her father when he asked her to help. And that, perhaps, is William's greatest fear. But he hasn't shown it. Not yet. Because now, the wheels are in motion. Charlotte is the shield bearer. The public has seen her. The myth is forming. And if you thought William's gamble was bold, wait until you hear how Catherine responded behind closed doors. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What do you do when the institution you've spent your adult life serving suddenly asks you to offer your daughter to it? Not as a child, but as a symbol. What do you say when you realize that while your title reads Princess of Wales, your influence may still be secondary to an old plan, an ancient machine, a crown that always moves one step ahead, even when your family isn't ready? For Catherine, Princess of Wales, this wasn't a dilemma she anticipated. She had, by all public accounts, mastered the royal game. Quiet consistency, poise under pressure, scandal-free living. She had transformed herself from Kate Middleton, commoner, outsider, media obsession, into the calm, curated foundation of a modern monarchy. And yet, none of that could have prepared her for the moment she was told. Charlotte is being activated. Not formally, not in those exact words. But the meaning was crystal clear. The Queen's letters had been opened. The Compass Group had met. The ceremony had been planned. The shield-bearer title was to be resurrected, and Catherine's daughter would carry it. The first time she heard those words, shield-bearer, selection, symbolic integration, she laughed. She thought it was a misunderstanding. But when she saw the documents, when she was shown the crest design, the projected 5-year rollout timeline, the language of soft influence modeling, the laugh vanished. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She went still. Those close to her described Catherine's reaction as eerie, composed, silent, hyper-aware, like someone hearing an emergency alarm they trained for, but hoped would never ring. And then came the real twist. She wasn't being asked for permission. She was being informed. William had already agreed. The palace had moved forward. Charlotte had been briefed in age-appropriate terms. The wheels were turning. Catherine had been bypassed. Think about that for a moment. The woman hailed as the future queen, the mother of the heir, the living embodiment of royal stability. And yet, when it came to one of the most historic roles bestowed on a royal child in modern memory, she wasn't in the room when the decision was made. And she felt it, deeply. A former aide recalled her saying quietly, almost to herself, "They only ask when the answer doesn't matter anymore." That's the emotional paradox Catherine now found herself trapped in. She wasn't against duty. She believed in service. She'd spent years guiding her children with careful balance, exposing them to royal life just enough to make them aware, but not enough to let it consume them. But this was different. The shield-bearer title wasn't ceremonial. It was symbolic, permanent, loaded. The more she read, the more she understood that Charlotte wasn't being prepped to be a duchess, a figurehead, or even a PR asset. She was being positioned as a backup queen, not literally, but emotionally. As the monarchy navigated a future of scandal, succession, and shifting public loyalties, Charlotte was being groomed to be the irrefutable proof that the crown could still produce something beloved, trustworthy, and fresh. Not George, not Louis, Charlotte. And that created a pressure Catherine hadn't expected, not just from the palace, but from within her own family. Because suddenly, George was quiet, withdrawn. He stopped asking questions about when I'll be king. He started asking if he could skip appearances, stay home during walkabouts. At school, he stopped correcting classmates who teased him. At home, he started drawing pictures of other jobs he could do. And Charlotte? Charlotte blossomed. She stood straighter. She asked bigger questions. She read books on famous women in history. She watched footage of the late Queen with fascination, not boredom. She started signing her school papers with tiny crests, copied from the medallion she'd been shown just once. Catherine saw it all. The shift, the tilt, the beginning of a new story, and the quiet fading of the one she thought she'd been telling. One night, alone with Charlotte during a stormy evening in Norfolk, Catherine decided to ask her something direct. Do you understand what it means? Charlotte didn't hesitate. Not everything, but I know it's mine now. And I think Granny wanted it that way. Catherine paused. Which Granny? Charlotte thought. The one everyone listened to. The one with the white hair. It was then Catherine understood something brutal. This wasn't just a title. This wasn't just a role. This was a bond. An emotional tie between Charlotte and the late Queen, a woman she'd only known briefly but admired immensely. A legacy not imposed, but accepted, even embraced. And yet, Catherine couldn't shake the fear. Because she had watched what happened to women in the royal family who became symbols too early. Margaret, Diana, Fergie, Meghan, even Camilla, in her own way. Women who had either been adored, destroyed, or both. Women who were turned into public property before they had fully become themselves. And now, her daughter, her fierce, witty, whip-smart little girl, was being packaged into a symbol before she'd even finished primary school. So what could she do? The answer? Control the pace. She was scrolling Instagram when the headline popped up. A blurry screen grab from a video taken outside Windsor Castle. The caption read, Princess Charlotte's Secret Ceremony, rare title bestowed behind closed doors. At first, Meghan Markle thought it was fan fiction. A meme. A satirical post from one of those palace parody accounts that still flooded her feed despite the best efforts of her digital PR team to block and bury the royal noise. But then came the second post. Then the third. Then a trending hashtag, #ShieldBearer. And then came the image that stopped her cold. Charlotte, standing straight, face unreadable, a sash draped across her shoulder, and stitched above her heart, a crest no one had seen in generations. Meghan stared at it, and the room, according to one friend who was present that day, went utterly silent. For a moment, she didn't say a word. Then she whispered, they actually did it. And just like that, the delicate scaffolding of distance. The palm trees, the Pacific breeze, the California sunshine collapsed around her. Because this wasn't just about a child. It wasn't just about the Windsors. It was about her. Let's rewind the tape. To understand the full weight of Meghan's reaction, you have to understand what the shield bearer title represents to her. When Meghan joined the royal family, she too was positioned as a symbol. A modern woman, a biracial duchess, a media-savvy, cause-driven breath of fresh air. The palace called it progress. But behind the scenes, Meghan quickly discovered the truth. She was never meant to be a pillar. She was meant to be a window, a showpiece, a distraction, something for the tabloids to devour while the firm continued its slow, self-preserving machinery. She wasn't given space. She wasn't given support. And most devastating of all, she wasn't given trust. And now, they were giving all of that to Charlotte. The irony was vicious. A royal insider close to the Sussexes later said, Meghan didn't mind that Charlotte was being elevated. What gutted her was the way they rolled it out. The secrecy, the reverence, the full machine swinging into action to protect a child. The exact opposite of what Meghan and Harry begged for when Archie was born. And therein lies the wound. Meghan had asked, pleaded, for controlled press, for protection, for a chance to shape the narrative around her children. She was told that's not how it works. She was told, you can't control the crown. But now, here was Charlotte, at 10 years old, being shaped, guided, sheltered, even coached by elite PR professionals. Being allowed to become something, rather than be consumed. The hypocrisy, in Meghan's eyes, was deafening. She paced the kitchen. She called Harry, who was at a production.